Ready for a deep dive? We're tackling a mystery that's puzzled people for, well, almost a century now. The disappearance of Amelia Earhart. We've got some pretty cool sources lined up for this. Excerpts from a podcast with Amelia's biographer, Susan Butler, and an interview with Richard Spink. He's really dug into the theories about what happened to her. So, what's our mission for this deep dive? We're going to retrace Earhart's journey leading up to that last flight. We'll try to unravel the different theories, and maybe, just maybe, we'll get a sense of why her story still resonates with us today.
You hit the nail on the head there. This case is so much more than just a missing plane. It goes beyond that. Amelia Earhart was a woman who defied expectations. She embodies this spirit of adventure and progress, and at a time when, well, those things weren't exactly encouraged for women.
Yeah, she was basically writing her own rule book and defying expectations, exactly. Imagine being a woman in the 1920s and deciding, you know what, I'm going to be a pilot. That wasn't just a career choice, it was a statement.
Absolutely. To understand Earhart, we need to picture the world she lived in. The 1920s were a time of massive societal change, but for women, the accepted roles were still pretty limited. So when she takes to the skies, she wasn't just flying a plane, she was breaking that glass ceiling of what women were, quote-unquote, supposed to do.
Okay, so let's rewind a bit. Back to Amelia's early life. Her biographer, Susan Butler, paints this picture of her as a fearless kid, always pushing boundaries. I mean, building a slide off the roof of her playhouse. That's not your average childhood game.
Right. That's a great anecdote, and it really highlights that adventurous spirit, which became so central to who she was. But it's also important to remember her childhood wasn't all sunshine and roses. Her family had financial struggles, and her father battled alcoholism. Those hardships, they likely played a role in her resilience later on.
It's almost like those early challenges, they kind of prepared her for the obstacles she'd face as a female aviator.
Yeah.
But wait, before she was soaring across the Atlantic, she was actually on the ground, working as a nurse during World War I.
That's right. And during that time, she contracted a sinus infection. And this is something that would actually bother her during some of her later flights. It's a detail that often gets overlooked, but it shows that even this seemingly invincible woman, she was human, dealing with real physical challenges.
It makes her achievements all the more impressive, right? And speaking of achievements, let's talk about that first transatlantic flight. Even though she was just a passenger, not the pilot, it made her instantly famous. It was all orchestrated by George Putnam, who later became her husband and her biggest supporter.
And this is where things get interesting. The original passenger, Amy Guest, she backed out last minute. But she had very specific criteria for her replacement. It had to be a lady, she insisted. Someone educated, well-spoken, someone who could represent women well in the public eye.
So they weren't just looking for any woman to take that seat. They needed someone who could handle the spotlight, handle the pressure. And they found that and so much more in Amelia. It's incredible how a twist of fate like that can change history.
It really does make you wonder what might have been if Amy Guest hadn't changed her mind. But one thing's for sure, that flight, it was just the beginning for Amelia. She went on to set multiple aviation records, and in 1932, she became the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic.
Talk about breaking barriers. But here's what I find even more incredible. She didn't just want to break those records. She actually used her platform to advocate for women's rights, challenging those restrictive gender roles decades before the modern feminist movement.
This is something that gets lost sometimes, In the retelling of her story, she wasn't content with just being a successful pilot. She wanted to use her fame to empower other women. And she had some powerful allies, like Eleanor Roosevelt, for example. They were close friends, and they both shared this passion for aviation.
Wait, Eleanor Roosevelt wanted to fly?
She did. Amelia was even encouraging her to get her pilot's license. Can you imagine the impact of the First Lady earning her wings? Unfortunately, President Roosevelt put a stop to it, cited concerns about the cost and all that. But it shows how Amelia was influencing women around her at all levels of society.
She was a trailblazer in every sense of the word. Okay, we've talked about the woman, her ambition, but now let's talk about the machine that really became a symbol of that ambition, the Lockheed Electra 10E. This wasn't just any plane. It was custom built for Amelia. Talk about high-flying goals.
It's true, this plane was a testament to her determination to push the boundaries of what was possible in aviation. She envisioned it as a flying laboratory, planning to conduct scientific experiments during her flights. It was a bold vision, a vision that sadly wouldn't be fully realized.
And then there was the plan for the ultimate adventure, circumnavigating the globe, following the equator. Now, that's some serious ambition.
Yeah.
But they hit a snag right out of the gate.
Right. A ground loop incident in Hawaii damaged the Electra, and force them to change their route. In simplest terms, a grain loop is when a plane loses control during takeoff or landing and swerves in a circle. It can be pretty dangerous. Because of the damage and repairs, they had to adjust their plan and rely on fuel stops in some really remote locations.
So instead of these well-established airports along the way, they were stopping at tiny islands, like Howland Island. Imagine trying to navigate to a speck of land in the vast Pacific Ocean back in 1937.
Yeah, this change in plans was crucial to the story. Navigating back then, it was a whole different ballgame. We're talking about rudimentary tools, limited communication, and a much higher margin for error. Even finding a small island was a huge challenge.
So they're in this custom-built plane attempting to fly around the whole world, facing these navigational challenges that are hard to even imagine today. It really sets the stage for what's coming next, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And you have to think about the technology back then. This was 1937. We're talking long flights, limited fuel, and trying to find this tiny island in the middle of the Pacific. The margin for error was, well, incredibly small.
Yeah, it kind of blows my mind just thinking about it. They were relying on the Itasca, a Coast Guard cutter stationed near Howland Island, to guide them in. I can't even imagine the tension as they got closer and closer.
They had smoke signals planned, radio transmissions, all sorts of things to try and make Howland easier to spot. But communication, that became a major issue. The signals weren't getting through clearly. All the static and interference made it nearly impossible to understand each other.
So they're running low on fuel, struggling to find this tiny island, and their communication's breaking down. This is getting more intense by the minute. What happened next?
Well, this is where the mystery really begins. Amelia's last radio transmissions, they were pretty chilling. She reported being on a specific line of position, running north and south, she said. But she couldn't see the island. And then, silence.
It gives me chills just thinking about it. This world-famous aviator, pushing the limits of what was possible, vanishing without a trace. It's no wonder this story has captivated people for so long.
It's a story that demands an explanation, and that's where the theories come in. The official explanation is what they call the crash and sink theory, that the Electra simply ran out of fuel and crashed into the Pacific. But the fact that they never found any definitive wreckage, it's always left room for doubt.
Hold on, if the ocean is so vast, wouldn't finding a plane from back then be like finding a needle in a haystack? Does the lack of wreckage really tell us anything for sure?
That's a great point. The Pacific Ocean is massive. Even with today's technology, finding debris from a crash 80 years ago would be unbelievably difficult. So the crash and sink theory, it's plausible, but it's not a sure thing.
Okay, so what are some of the other theories then? What else could have happened?
Well, there's the castaway theory, which suggests that they might have landed on a nearby island, like Gardner Island, which is now called Nikumaroro. It was uninhabited at the time. And some researchers think they may have survived the crash, but then eventually died due to the harsh conditions.
I've seen some documentaries about those expeditions to Gardner Island, searching for any signs of Amelia and Fred.
Yeah.
And they found some interesting things, like possible bone fragments and remnants of a campsite. So it's definitely a possibility, right?
Oh, it is. But the evidence is circumstantial, and the island's weather. All that erosion could have easily destroyed any real proof over time. It's a tantalizing theory, but proving it, well, that's another story.
So we've got the official crash and sink theory. We've got them possibly surviving as castaways. But then things start to get really interesting with some of the, shall we say, more unconventional theories.
Right. There are theories about Amelia being a spy for the U.S. government, that she was on a secret mission and her disappearance was all staged. There's even the Tokyo Rose theory, saying she was captured by the Japanese and forced to broadcast propaganda during World War II.
Wow, those are some wild theories. But the one that seems to get the most attention is the Japanese capture theory. Richard Spink, our source, has spent years researching this, hasn't he?
He has. Spink's convinced that Amelia and Fred were captured by the Japanese after they landed in the Marshall Islands. He argues that their capture was kept secret to avoid stirring up trouble between the U.S. and Japan before World War II.
It's a bold claim, for sure. What evidence does he have to support it? I mean, you don't hear about a potential government cover-up of this magnitude every day.
You're right about that. Well, Spink points to several things. He says there are eyewitness accounts from Marshall Islanders who say they saw the plane and its occupants in Japanese custody. He also mentions aluminum fragments, consistent with the Electra found on Millie Atoll.
And what about that photograph? The one that supposedly shows Amelia and Fred on a dock with a Japanese ship in the background. It was everywhere in the news a while back.
Oh, that photograph. It's been debated endlessly. Spink is convinced it's authentic. He's even had forensic analysis done to try and prove it. Others say it's either a hoax or a case of mistaken identity.
It's like those blurry Bigfoot photos, you know.
Hmm.
It's hard to say for sure what you're looking at. But Spink's research goes even further. He's looked at the geography of the islands as evidence, too. He thinks the Japanese modified the coral reef to allow a barge to reach the island at high tide, like they needed to move the Electra.
Right. Spink's argument is that the Japanese captured Amelia and Fred, and then needed to get the Electra off the island, without leaving a trace. The changes to the reef, he says, are proof of this.
Okay, let's say just for a moment that Spink is right. What happened to Amelia after she was captured?
That's the question, isn't it? And it's one that's still unanswered. Spink believes she might have been kept prisoner on Saipan, but there's nothing concrete to confirm what ultimately happened to her. Some people think she died while she was captive, while others still hold out hope that she somehow escaped, or was eventually released.
So we have all these compelling theories, but we're still left with that same haunting question. What happened to Amelia Earhart? And what about those Freedom of Information Act requests? I remember hearing about another researcher, Les Kinney. He's been trying to get access to classified documents related to her disappearance.
Yeah, Kinney's filed a ton of requests over the years, looking for anything that might shed some light on Amelia's fate. And here's where things get really interesting. Many of his requests have been denied, which of course just makes people even more suspicious, like there's something the government doesn't want us to know.
It's kind of unsettling, isn't it, to think that there might be answers out there. Locked away in some government archive. What are they so afraid of us finding out?
It's definitely a point that Spink and others who believe in the Japanese capture theory bring up a lot. If there wasn't a cover-up, why all the secrecy? It's a question that hangs over this whole story.
It's almost like Amelia's disappearance created this void that everyone's trying to fill with explanations.
Yeah.
And with each new piece of evidence, each new theory, the mystery just keeps getting deeper.
Exactly. But even if we never figure out what happened to her, her story keeps resonating with us. It reminds us of the power of human courage and how much we're fascinated by the unknown.
Okay, so we've looked at the mystery, the theories, the evidence, or lack thereof. But let's change gears a little. What about Amelia Earhart's legacy? What impact did she have on the world?
Even if we never know what happened to her in the end, there's no denying the impact she had on aviation and on women especially.
Yeah, it's amazing when you think about her impact, especially in the context of the time she lived in. I mean, here she is challenging these gender norms, these expectations, decades before the modern feminist movement even started.
Exactly. Think about it. A woman in the 1920s, not just flying, but actually competing in this male-dominated field. Amelia wasn't just breaking altitude records, she was breaking those expectations and what women were capable of. And that's why she still resonates with us today, you know?
She wasn't afraid to stand out, to push those boundaries, and she used her fame to advocate for other women, encouraging them to go after their passions, no matter how unconventional they might have seemed at the time.
It's fascinating how her message still speaks to people today, that idea that limitations are often self-imposed, you know, and that with enough courage and determination, we can achieve amazing things.
She's become such a powerful symbol of empowerment, a symbol of daring to dream big and then actually going after those dreams.
Absolutely. And it's not just about her achievements as a pilot. It's about her spirit, that unwavering belief in what's possible. She showed the world that you can chart your own course. You don't have to be limited by what society expects of you.
It's inspiring, for sure, but it's also kind of bittersweet, knowing that this incredible woman, at the height of her career, vanished without a trace. It's like her story was cut short before we could see what she might have accomplished next.
Yeah, there's definitely a sense of unfinished business, a story that was left untold. And maybe that's part of why her disappearance still fascinates us. We're left wondering, imagining what might have been.
It's like we're all trying to piece together this giant puzzle, searching for that one missing piece that will finally reveal the truth.
Maybe that's the beauty of it, you know? The mystery keeps us engaged, keeps us asking questions, it keeps her story alive.
I also think there's something about human nature, that we're drawn to mysteries, to these puzzles that seem impossible to solve. And Amelia Earhart's disappearance, it's the ultimate unsolved puzzle.
It's a puzzle that has sparked so many books, documentaries, research projects, even with all the theories, all the speculation. That core question remains, what really happened to Amelia Earhart?
It's a question that might never have a definitive answer, but maybe the search for that answer, That journey of exploration and discovery is just as important as the destination.
And it leaves us with one final question to think about. If Amelia was captured by the Japanese, like Richard Spink believes, what might her experience have been like? What stories could she have told? What insights could she have shared if she had returned?
It's a haunting thought, and it adds another layer to this already complex legacy of Amelia Earhart.
Her story is a tapestry, woven with threads of adventure, courage, mystery, and in the end, tragedy. It's a story that challenges us, sparks our imaginations, and reminds us that even when faced with the unknown, the human spirit can achieve incredible things.
So there you have it, our deep dive into the life, disappearance, and enduring legacy of Amelia Earhart, a woman who dared to dream big, to defy expectations, and to leave her mark on the world.
And to all our listeners out there, if you're now just as captivated by Amelia's story as we are, remember, there's a ton of information out there. Books, documentaries, research, even online forums, all dedicated to unraveling this mystery.
So keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep that spirit of adventure alive. You never know what you might discover.